In a few moments, we're going to discuss some anime characters that live rather luxurious lives, but before we get into that, allow me to tell you about a way that you can get your own rather luxurious products at a price point that can't be beat. This video is sponsored by Ekster, the company behind the world's first trackable wallet, and over at Ekster, their mission is simple: update your everyday essentials with gear that's slim, smart, and sustainable. Recently, along with this vacuum travel bag and vacuum that are also available on their site, Ekster sent me this wallet right here. This is the Ekster Wallet Pro. Now, not only is the Wallet Pro made from environmentally certified premium leather, it also holds up to 12 cards plus cash and has built-in RFID protection against wireless theft. Oh yeah, and my favorite part, it does that little instant access quick card pop-up button. If you decide to cop an Ekster wallet, you should also add on Ekster's new Finder card. The Finder card basically works with Apple's Find My app so that you never lose your wallet again. Right now, Ekster is running their Labor Day sale with up to 35% off. But if you use my code TeddySlump, you can unlock an additional 10% off. So yeah, head on over to Ekster.com today and use my code TeddySlump to cop a wallet at a price that won't destroy yours. Since the dawn of currency itself, humanity has been enamored with stories about money. Characters that have it, characters that don't have it, characters in the pursuit of it. If money is what makes the world go round, then the realm of fiction is where we see just how fast money can make the world spin. Myths about money, legends about money, fairy tales about money, songs about money, books about money, movies about money, TV shows about money, videos about money. I think it's fair to say that we as a species really like to create and consume shit that has money as a focal point, and it would appear, at least anecdotally, that those of us who are responsible for creating and consuming anime really like content about money. My personal theory is that this is the case because anime attracts a lot of broke niggas. Well, actually, I think it would be more accurate to say anime makes a lot of broke niggas thanks to the demonic power of gacha games and merchandising, but semantics aside, just like romance anime hit different when you don't have romance in your life, stories of the exorbitantly wealthy hit different when you yourself aren't exorbitantly wealthy. And I mean, hey, statistically speaking, the vast majority of y'all watching this right now do not have access to the obscene sums of wealth needed to be
are broke.
They say that money can practically change your reality, that the billionaires of the world are effectively living on an entirely different planet than the rest of us plebeians down here, and I think that sort of class divide actually translates into anime, but in a way that's somehow even crazier than what we have in the IRL world, and the IRL world is pretty crazy as is. You see, because we're constantly seeing average working class Joes in anime with insane, superhuman, godly abilities, for rich people to still come off as impressive in comparison, their bag needs to be able to stretch a lot further than any bag can IRL. For excess wealth to still feel excessive in a medium of fiction that relishes in excess, it has excess built into its very DNA, you kinda have to up the ante. Being rich in anime isn't just a leg up on the rest of the world around you. Being rich in anime is a bona fide superpower that can at times be on par with the otherwise supernatural abilities of any given world. I can think of quite a few anime off the top of my head that implicitly and sometimes explicitly argue that a lot of money is a stronger force of nature than whatever the power system of their world is, and to think that even within the realm of fiction we can't escape the power of the almighty dollar, I'm not gonna lie, that shit is kinda spooky, man. Today, I wanna take a look at some of these characters that represent this very idea. Some characters that embody the old saying, money is power. I wanna look at how they got their bags, how they grow their bags, and most importantly, how they spend their bags. Because look, bro, let me just tell you right now, these anime bag chasers, they're on a whole nother level with this shit, bro. Bungo Stray Dogs is a seinen anime about books. Hello?
You dare talk about another character before me?
What the fuck? Kaiba?
Yeah, it's Kaiba, nigga. And you best not talk about Bungo without talking about
Wait, okay,
me
I was actually
first.
going to talk about you second, because basically I was going to start with like the brokest character and then go richer and richer and kind of like progressively
Nigga,
get
I
more.
don't care. You start the video off talking about me. goodbye.
All right, so change of plans. We'll get back to Bungo Stray Dogs in a bit, but I guess we're talking about Seto Kaiba first.
Damn, you gonna let him do you dirty like that?
Hey, you shut the fuck up. And you subscribe. If nothing else, Seto Kaiba can best be described as relentless. His whole backstory, his whole advancement to the top of the Yu-Gi-Oh world in terms of wealth, power, and influence is basically the story of a man who is so unbelievably determined, so relentlessly egotistical that he simply will not lose. Like, he straight up refuses to lose, and even if he does happen to lose every now and then because of like plot, you as a viewer know damn well that this nigga Kaiba will be spinning back time and time and time again until he finally achieves his desired victory. But more on that later. I want to start off by discussing how exactly Kaiba obtained his wealth, because I will say, alright, credit where credit is due. Of all the characters that we'll be discussing today, Kaiba is probably the only character that you could truly say got it up out the mud. Like, he's the only character that we watched in real time ascend from the lowest pits of poverty to the highest peaks of prosperity. And even though his methods were, and still are, let's say, underhanded at best, hey man, his come up is still pretty impressive, at least objectively speaking. Seto essentially obtained his wealth by yoinking it off of his adoptive father, 𝙏𝙖𝙡𝙠 Kaiba. You see, back in the day, 𝙏𝙖𝙡 was the CEO of Kaiba Corp, and Kaiba Corp, before Seto took over at least, was essentially a military contracting company that made all of its money by starting wars and then providing weapons to both sides of said wars. Now frankly, I don't know if Seto took over the company because he saw that they were doing the literal devil's work, or if he chose to take over because he just wanted the paper. Honestly, it's probably a bit of both, but long story short, he managed to finagle the company from under his father's nose, and after taking over, he stopped funding wars and put all that money in holographic children's card games and amusement parks. Now, if we're going by IRL rules, pivoting your company from Lockheed Martin into Nintendo is a recipe for going broke. Let's just keep it a stack right now. Fortunately for Kaiba, we're going by Yu-Gi-Oh verse rules, and in the Yu-Gi-Oh verse, the entire world seems to revolve around that aforementioned holographic children's card game. And so yeah, there was a lane for Kaiba to make billions upon billions of dollars off games and shit without killing people. Apart from his father, I guess, who decided to hit the self-checkout line after getting hoed by a 15-year-old on the world stage. Anywho, as you could probably imagine, billions upon billions of dollars worth of assets don't necessarily mix well with a teenaged, undeveloped prefrontal cortex. And so instead of spending his bottomless pit of wealth responsibly, teenage Kaiba kinda just uses his company as collateral to fund a bunch of bullshit that a teenager with undiagnosed BPD would probably buy while in an infinite manic state. A lot of Kaiba's insane purchases are directly tied to the game of Duel Monsters itself. He's kind of obsessed with Duel Monsters, but I mean, you probably already knew that. Kaiba, Blue Eyes White Dragon, they're kind of like one of the more mainstream anime things to come out of the early 2000s. It's actually kind of funny because if you look at Kaiba's wealth from like a meta perspective, you low-key start to realize that Kaiba is so rich that he actually crosses over into plot device territory, in the sense that anytime the story wants an excuse to have a big-ass Duel Monsters tournament arc for no reason, the writer will kind of just go, oh yeah, so Kaiba got bored and decided to host a random fucking tournament because why not? One of the first times we as viewers really get to see Kaiba flex the true depth of his pockets is during the Battle City tournament arc in the original anime. You see, at the beginning of the Battle City arc, Kaiba learns about the existence of the 3 Egyptian god cards, 3 cards that are supposedly stronger than even the Exodia cards that his main rival Yugi used to have in his deck. Now, Kaiba actually gets his hands on one of these cards via this chick named Ishizu, but the other 2 cards seem to be in the hands of a group known as the Rare Hunters. The Rare Hunters being exactly what their name implies, an evil cabal of rare Duel Monsters card hunters. In order to get his hands on the other 2 Egyptian god cards, Kaiba decides to host a Duel Monsters tournament in hopes that it'll attract the Rare Hunters into one centralized location so that he can win the cards off of them. But in typical Kaiba fashion, just hosting a tournament isn't enough. Anyone can host a tournament, just like anyone can, you know, like this video and subscribe to this video. please. And so Kaiba decides to buy out an entire fucking city for a few days so that he can have a bunch of kids and criminals running around all over the place while putting their souls on the line over this very serious children's card game. Throughout the remainder of Kaiba's life, we bear witness to Kaiba making several more insane purchases, most of which are for the sake of further advancing his dominance over the game of Duel Monsters. We see him purchase a giant blimp hotel where he can play cards against his ops. We see him blow up a private island that his father had bought simply because he didn't like the fact that the island's existence reminded him of his father. We can presume that he purchased yet another private island in order to build the Duel Academy, the school in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX where kids go to boarding school to learn about Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards instead of math. We see him fund absolute bullshit space initiatives like launching Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards into orbit so that aliens can learn how to play or some shit. I don't know, but perhaps the craziest purchases that Kaiba made in his entire lifetime were the run of purchases that he went on in the 2016 Dark Side of Dimensions movie. Now in the DSOD timeline, Kaiba isn't happy, right? In his mind, he never got his run back with the pharaoh that used to possess Yugi during their duels back in the day. This particular timeline takes place a few years after the main series, and so in order to cope with the fact that he'll never get his run back with the pharaoh, you see, that's the thing, right? Kaiba doesn't really cope. He just gets more and more unhinged until he gets what he wants. In this timeline, Kaiba decides to build a giant space station dedicated solely to simulating his duels with the pharaoh down to pinpoint accuracy. At this point, his company's hologram/VR technology has become powerful enough that it's basically indistinguishable from reality. Unfortunately for the rest of the world's power grid, this simulation still isn't enough for Kaiba. Kaiba's ego won't let him accept a win against a mere VR simulation of his rival, no matter how accurate said simulation may be. Kaiba's ego wants to get his run back on the real deal, and so with the power vested in him by billions upon billions of shareholder dollars, Kaiba proceeds to create some sort of crazy VR invention that allows him to literally travel into the afterlife so that he can finally get his spin back on the pharaoh. Do you know how insane you have to be to breach the wall between dimensions because a grown man beat you in a children's card game when you were like 16 years old? Now, when it comes to Kaiba's total net worth, it's kinda hard to judge, right? I had initially pegged him as the single richest character in this video based solely off the feats of science fiction that he was able to accomplish with his money. However, upon re-examining the situation, I did find myself lowering his estimated net worth a bit based off of the rules of the verse that he exists in. What do I mean by that? Well, you see, shit like breaching into another dimension definitely sounds like an impossible feat to us as denizens of the IRL world, but in the Yu-Gi-Oh verse, that type of shit is like not that uncommon. Like, don't get me wrong, it's rare, but it's not something that me, you, or a random Japanese teenager can't do if we have access to the right magical tools. Basically, the presence and potency of magic within the Yu-Gi-Oh verse kinda devalues Kaiba's dollar a little bit. Not only does it make his purchases hard to compare to IRL standards for the sake of this video, it also makes it hard to take his more impressive feats of science at face value when, for all we know, these feats can be chalked up to the power of some magical ancient Egyptian energy source or some shit like that. With that said, Kaiba's assets in terms of like industry, branding, IPs, tech, infrastructure, and things of that nature, that's pretty undeniable no matter how you try to spin it. Seto Kaiba, if nothing else, is a wealthy man. And so for the sake of this video, I'm gonna estimate his net worth is probably somewhere in the ballpark of like maybe 100 to 500 billion dollars. So definitely an insane net worth, enough to put him well above the richest man in the world IRL, but really only a fraction of the amount of money that we're going to be getting into throughout the remainder of this video. Anywho, now that we've fucked up the logical structure of this video by talking about Kaiba first when he really should have been discussed second, we're actually going to have to backtrack a bit and talk about a character who, albeit broker than Kaiba, definitely gets more bang for his buck than perhaps anyone else on this list. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Bungo Stray Dog's very own Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald. Simply put, Bungo Stray Dogs is a seinen anime about books. Every major character in this series is both inspired by and a reference to some piece of classical literature throughout history, mostly Japanese, European, and American literature, and so naturally, it only makes sense that a character inspired by perhaps the most famous critique of American capitalism in history is an American businessman that is absolutely fucking loaded. The very first time we see Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald in this series, we're immediately being made to bear witness to some rich nigga bullshit, bro. You see, the main heroes of this series, the Armed Detective Agency, are a small group of Japanese super detectives that use the city of Yokohama as their base of operations. Imagine you're at work one day, doing your thing, doing your little detective shift, when all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, the very foundations that hold your workplace upright begin to shake. You and your coworkers, confused and a bit shocked by these sudden tremors, decide to go outside to investigate, right? To figure out what exactly is going on. But upon making it outside, instead of seeing some normal shit, you and your coworkers look up to see a literal fucking helicopter casually landing on the highway overpass next to your building. Bear in mind, none of these buildings have an actual helipad landing station on the roof, right? The nigga in the helicopter just casually decided to land his shit up there because he can. Cut to a few minutes later, and this man, Francis, has made himself at home in the Armed Detective Agency's head office. Apparently, Francis has come all the way from the US with a business proposal for the leader of the Armed Detective Agency, Fukuzawa. Francis pulls up on Fukuzawa and pops out with this fat-ass briefcase of money. Nothing but straight Benjis in that motherfucker, and he's like, look man, let me get this company up off you real quick for like 60 mil. Fukuzawa's like, nah. Francis is like, okay, old sport, you drive a hard bargain. How about this? 70 mil plus my new Patek final offer. Fukuzawa, once again, is like, nah. Fitzgerald, now unwilling to bargain any further, is like, alright then, say less. In that case, me and my folks are just gonna start flipping this city backwards until y'all decide to cough up the were-tiger. The were-tiger being Atsushi, by the way. And yeah, about a day after their initial meeting, Fitzgerald proceeds to do exactly as promised, leveraging his money, resources, and access to magical superpowers to basically turn Yokohama into somewhat of a living hellscape for the everyday residents of the city. Now, Fitzgerald's team, which is known as the Guild, is a team of some rather dangerous ability users. So dangerous, in fact, that the Armed Detective Agency ends up having to join forces with the Mafia just so that they can hang. But among all the Guild's dangerous ability users, perhaps the single most dangerous ability user in that Guild, and shit, potentially one of the most dangerous ability users in the entire show, actually happens to be Fitzgerald himself, as his ability, which is known as the Great Fitzgerald, is, for a lack of a better term, absolutely fucking broken. Remember how earlier I was saying that Fitzgerald gets an insane bang for his buck compared to the other characters in this video? Yeah, well, when I said bang back then, I meant like a literal bang, bro. Pause, whoa. Simply put, the Great Fitzgerald allows our boy Francis to convert his monetary wealth into physical strength that he can use for battle. The power boost that he gets scaling to the amount of money that he spends. Personally, I like to call Francis's ability Cash for All, since it basically functions like One for All with cash. It actually even looks like One for All, given the fact that both Bungo and My Hero were animated by Bones, and I mean, as far as strength enhancement goes, I'd say it's fair to compare the Great Fitzgerald to like maybe a mid-tier One for All 40%, but unfortunately for Francis, the Great Fitzgerald is missing one crucial component of One for All that even billions upon billions of dollars worth of strength can't make up for. That component, ladies and gentlemen, being the plot armor. You see, unfortunately, all the money in the world isn't enough for Fitzgerald to overcome the omnipotent force known as anime MC plot armor, and even after he literally drained his bank account down to zero while fighting Atsushi, it still wasn't enough, bro. Plot armor always wins. Francis ends up losing the fight, and I mean, it goes without saying that on top of losing the fight, he's also ass out of money now, but like a true bag hunter, it isn't long before Francis has re-secured his spot on the Forbes list, this time reacquiring his billions the same way that billionaires acquire their shit IRL. Exploitation. Alright, so let me set the scene for you, because the story of how Fitzgerald got his billions back is somewhat of a complicated story, and I just want to save time here. Basically, there are three main characters that you need to keep track of for this story to make sense. Character number one is a man named Dr. TJ Eckelberg. TJ is an engineer that's being accused of having murdered his colleague in a drunken rage. Character number two is a man named Tom Buchanan. Tom is the chairman of the company that employs TJ, and spoiler alert, he is the actual perpetrator of the murder that TJ is being accused of. Lastly, character number three is, of course, Fitzgerald himself. So let's bounce back to character number one, Dr. TJ Eckelberg. To make a long story short, Dr. Eckelberg is the man responsible for creating a security system called Eyes of God. Eyes of God is essentially a surveillance system that can auto-identify people through biometrics. It can look at someone, connect to like a government database or some shit, and automatically identify who it's looking at. Now, even though TJ created Eyes of God, the system itself is owned by Manhasset Security, the company that Tom is the chairman of, and thanks to his influence over Manhasset Security, Tom is able to sneak some backdoor code into the Eyes of God system that essentially allows him to get away with murder by virtually replacing his likeness with the likeness of someone else. In this case, that someone else is Dr. TJ Eckelberg. Fitzgerald somehow figures this out. Well, actually his right-hand woman Louisa figures this out, but that's neither here nor there, because once he finds out that Tom Buchanan is the actual murderer, Francis uses this knowledge to extort $400,000 off of Tom on the day of the trial. Tom, not wanting to get sent to the can for murder, agrees to pay the $400K, but almost immediately after he gets paid, Francis turns around and double crosses the man, revealing to the jury that Tom is in fact the murderer, with his evidence being a secret recording that he took of Tom confessing to the murder and paying him off. Now, anyone who knows how the US legal system works will know that, unfortunately, this evidence, which was illegally recorded, isn't admissible in court. However, Francis's goal wasn't to get Tom arrested. Hell, it wasn't even to get TJ exonerated. Francis's only goal was to find a way to profit off of the whole ordeal, and he managed to do so by shorting the stocks for Manhasset Security to an order of $400 million. In other words, Francis placed a $400 million bet on the fact that Tom's stock prices would plummet before proceeding to out Tom as a murderer to the world so that his shareholders would abandon ship, thus causing the stock price to plummet and profiting Francis several hundred million, if not a few billion dollars in the process. And so, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald is a whole different animal when it comes to chasing that bag. He's a whole different breed when it comes to that paper, because even if he happens to lose every single dollar to his name, all he needs to do is gather a couple cents, and within a few days he will have flipped those couple cents into a couple billion dollars. Now again, like Kaiba, it's a bit difficult to ascribe a net worth to Francis since we're never really given any concrete statements about his assets. However, we do know that Fitzgerald hit a lick on Tom Buchanan because he was specifically trying to raise $50 billion. And so if we assume that these $50 billion were raised successfully, then we can go ahead and peg Francis at about $50 billion US worth of net worth, which brings the combined total net worth of the characters in this video up to about $550 billion. Now, $550 billion, that's a good little chunk of change, especially when you consider the fact that this insane sum of wealth is controlled by a mere 2 characters. But look, bro, I'm gonna just keep it a full stack right now. $550 billion? That's little bucks, bro. What if I told you that the next character on this list has pockets that are so deep, that are so heavy, that $550 billion makes up a mere 10% of her wealth? Would you believe me? Yes? No? Yes? Well, I hope you said no. Actually, I hope you liked the video and subscribed, but in regards to the question, I hope you said no, because I lied. $550 billion is not 10% of this next character's wealth, it's 3%. Cleopatra Korns is both the namesake and the protagonist of a little-known anime from the 80s called Cleopatra DC. Like Fitzgerald, who we just discussed, Miss Korns is also an American business mogul, but unlike Francis, whose guild is only working with a few $1 billion at their disposal, Miss Korns happens to be working with so much money that her operation makes Francis's operation look like a bunch of little kids serving lemonade at the playground. If you want to get a good idea of just how filthy rich Cleopatra is in this series, then allow me to explain to you why they decided to name this show Cleopatra DC in the first place. You see, within the Cleopatra DC universe, the United States of America actually has two DCs. DC number 1 is the DC that we all know and love IRL. Washington, D.C. They say that Washington, D.C. is where all the political power circulates within the United States. DC number 2, on the other hand, and this DC is exclusive to the show, obviously, is Cleopatra DC. Now, Cleopatra DC is not a physical place like Washington. No. Cleopatra DC is the nickname that was given to Cleopatra Korns, the woman, since, like Washington, where political power is circulated, it is said that Miss Korns herself is responsible for circulating the vast majority of the economic power in the US. In other words, homegirl makes so much bread that she is the US economy. Granted, this was the late 80s, early 90s, and so, the size of the US economy wasn't as crazy as it is today, but that still means that Cleopatra Korns has an estimated net worth of $5 to $20 trillion, and so yeah, I think you can probably see why I said Seto and them were over there playing with little boy bucks. Now, with such an insane net worth, you'd think that Cleo, as they call her, is probably a somewhat ruthless businesswoman. If not ruthless, at least a serious individual, right? Cleo, for a lack of a better term, is an absolute goofball, and I want to take you all through the first episode of this 3-episode OVA because honestly, I can't really do the opulence of this woman's lifestyle justice without really just showing you the type of bullshit that she be on daily. And so, yeah, without any further ado, allow me to take you all over to New York City in the late 1980s. The year is 1989. The Nintendo Game Boy is taking the world by storm, and McDonald's just released their McDonald's pizza, which they would subsequently go on to discontinue and fuck up our timeline forever. Somewhere in New York, in a big penthouse apartment lodged within an even bigger skyscraper, a woman slumbers peacefully in her bed, unaware of the absolute insanity that is about to ensue. Now, before we continue, I want to once again drive home the fact that this anime was released in the 80s, right? Therefore, you can't fully blame them if any particular aspect of the story didn't age well. So what do I mean by that? So, a plane crashes into this New York City skyscraper. Apparently, the pilot of said plane was being shot at by some currently unknown adversaries, and upon investigating the pilot of this plane and his condition, Cleo and her right-hand woman Sue-in find that this pilot is in a daze, half-mindedly uttering the name Marianne. Now, to save us all some precious time, I'm going to give y'all a quick crash course rundown on Marianne and her importance to this story. Basically, Marianne is engaged to the pilot that we just saw fly into the building. However, she's also being sought after by a man named Shin Takuma. Shin Takuma, like Cleo, is fucking loaded as hell. Maybe not as loaded as Cleo herself, but he's still well into the billions range, probably hundreds of billions. Anywho, in order to extort Marianne's father into marrying his daughter to him, Shin Takuma has basically threatened to cripple Marianne's father's business because basically both of them work in the oil industry and Marianne's pops relies on Shin Takuma's business to stay afloat, and so yeah, he's basically like, run me your daughter or your whole net worth is cooked. On top of this whole marriage extortion scheme that he has going on, Shin Takuma also sent this military assassin nigga named Karts to kill Cleo once he realizes that Marianne's fiance is currently under her care. Karts tries to do all sorts of crazy shit to Cleo in order to snipe her off the map. Like, there's this one scene where he blows up her whole garage just before she hops into her Ferrari, and it's like, okay, am I tweaking, or did this random Japanese OVA just predict both attacks on the towers in one singular episode like 15 years before it happened? I don't know, man. There's something we don't know about Toei Animation, bro. Anywho, with all this crazy shit going on at once, you may be curious about how Cleo managed to remedy this situation, right? How the woman managed to save both Marianne and herself. Well, when you have pockets so deep that you make the entire 2025 US military budget look like chump change, basically anything is possible. And so Cleo decides to start her counterattack against Shintakuma by hosting a party. Now, you'd think that hosting a party in such a dire situation would be one of the last things you'd want to do, right? Like, you've got highly trained assassins coming after your dome piece and you're out here running around in Playboy bunny costumes. It just doesn't add up. At least, not on the surface. You see, what's actually going on here is a trap. This sumptuous display of wealth that Cleopatra is putting on is actually nothing more than a ruse meant to draw out Karts and his men. And so when the party does just that, luring the unsuspecting commandos out of hiding, Cleo proceeds to pull the Uno reverse card on them, revealing that every attendee of this party isn't just some hoity-toity socialite. They too are trained killers, and they outnumber Karts' men like at least 7-1. As far as the Marianne situation with Shintakuma is concerned, well, what better way to stop financial extortion than to financially extort the financial extorter himself? You see, oil moguls can't make money without oil, just like I can't make money without you liking the vid and subscribing and maybe checking out that link in the description. Anywho, after realizing that Shintakuma's wealth is tied mainly to his oil investments, the woman proceeds to buy out the land in front of Shintakuma's oil rig, essentially rendering his rig useless since she's basically getting first pickings on all the oil in the area. Now, frankly, I don't know how legal or even physically viable this strategy would be IRL, but again, don't think about it too much, bro. Anime type shit. Now, even though Shintakuma is really obsessed with Marianne, his love for this woman simply does not outweigh his love for the almighty dollar bill. And so, after seeing the monetary value of his primary asset dissolving in front of his very eyes, Shintakuma damn near instantly folds to Cleo's demands, returning Marianne to her fiancé safe and sound, and also buying back the land that Cleo just bought at like a 20% upcharge. So now, not only has Cleo just saved an innocent woman from fucking domestic violence, she also hit a lick off of a billionaire for damn near the full sum of his worth. And let's not forget the fact that she also just bitched a military hardened assassin while wearing a bunny suit just a few hours earlier. And this is just half the episode, by the way. The rest of the episode kind of changes tone a little bit. Cleo has to like Mission Impossible save the oil rig from getting hit by like a communist missile or some shit. I don't know, she had a jetpack though, so that was cool. But yeah, the stakes of this show kind of just keep getting crazier and crazier as it progresses. So if you're into seeing pretty rich blonde women jump out of fighter jets and blast at space shuttles with RPGs, maybe give Cleopatra DC a try. Fair warning though, it is an 80s anime OVA, and so you will see nipples. That's just a given, bro. I'm sorry. Now, like I said earlier, Cleopatra's net worth is basically just the wealth of the United States in the 80s. And so as far as our live count is concerned, we could probably just go ahead and tag a cool little 20 trill into the 550 bill that we already had counting. So that's nice, but if you thought one singular blonde woman commanding $20 trillion was starting to push the limits of what was believable, well, allow me to introduce you to our next and final character on this list of lavish luminaries, Nagi Sanzenin, from a show known as Hayate the Combat Butler. Now, right off the rip, I want to give you the numbers for Nagi Sanzenin because I think that'll help set the tone for what you can expect in this last portion of the video. Let's start with her age. Nagi Sanzenin comes in at a measly 13 years of age, making her by far the youngest character in this video. Fitzgerald was a full-grown man, Kaiba was a teen to young adult, Cleopatra, it's a bit vague for her, but based on the fact that she has a driver's license in the US, we can assume that she's at least 16 years of age, although I personally feel a lot more comfortable just saying she was like early to mid 20s, but you know, you can never really know with chicks in anime, bruh. And then we have Nagi Sanzenin, a preteen commanding wealth that is quite literally unquantifiable in nature. Now, to be fair, Nagi is not the pioneer of this estate. That title would go to her grandfather, Mikado Sanzenin, who made his money by basically being a fortune-telling super investor. We're told that Mikado first saw the cordless telephone back in the 50s and the MP3 player back in the 60s, and so to bring that into modern sensibilities, that would be like investing in Apple the day they were founded because you foresaw the rise of the iPhone. Yeah, you would make a shit ton of money, bro. Anywho, through his borderline supernatural investing skills, Mikado went on to amass himself what is quite literally an incalculable amount of wealth. And as far as inheriting that wealth is concerned, Nagi Sanzenin, the man's granddaughter, is first in line. Well, at least she was first in line until Mikado decided to go full Mr. Beast mode and offer the entirety of his wealth to anyone that can make Nagi apologize, but that's neither here nor there. That's a bit later in the show. We're not going to cover all the crazy shit that goes on in that portion of the show. For now, I just want to focus on the first few episodes of Hayate the Combat Butler, the episodes where we meet Nagi and become accustomed to her lifestyle, because it's in these episodes that we really get to see what having too much money does to someone. And I mean, I guess the whole video has basically been exploring what too much money does to someone, but just bear with me, bro, okay? There's really only so many ways I can introduce progressively richer and richer characters without getting kinda stale at some point. Have you subscribed yet? Hayate the Combat Butler follows the story of Hayate Ayasaki, a young boy who lives a relatively normal life, apart from the fact that his wildly irresponsible excuses for parents left him with $1 million in debt. Yes, $1 million in debt. Apparently, Hayate's parents somehow managed to take out a $1 million loan from the Yakuza, and instead of paying the loan back, they kind of just skipped town and left their son with the $1 million bill as a Christmas gift. Now, obviously, given the fact that he's a literal child, Hayate can't afford to pay back the 7-figure debt that he's in, but unfortunately for Hayate, the Yakuza doesn't give a damn if he's middle-aged or middle school-aged. They're going to get their bread back one way or another. Hayate, in order to not die, ends up going on the run from the Yakuza. You see, even though he's in a pretty shitty financial situation right now, the one saving grace that he does have on his side is the fact that he, for some reason, has borderline superhuman athleticism. Actually, no, I'm not saying borderline no more. That shit isn't even borderline, bro. He's low-key just a superhero, but as he's ducking the Yakuza on Christmas night, the boy ends up meeting Nagi Sanzenin through pure coincidence. I think she was trying to use a vending machine for the first time and was confused by the fact that it didn't accept her unlimited credit card, and as part of the course, through the power of anime bullshit, Hayate ends up meeting Nagi, wooing Nagi, and saving Nagi from some kidnappers that wanted to take her for ransom. Now, after becoming acquainted with Nagi and her butler Maria, one thing leads to another, and Nagi basically ends up casually paying off the $1 million debt that Hayate owed to the Yakuza. However, instead of calling it even and letting Hayate go on and live his life as a free man, Nagi decides to hold the debt over Hayate's head, saying that if he wants to pay her back, he has to work as one of her butlers for the next 40 years. Now, to some, this might not sound like too bad a deal. Having a guaranteed job as a live-in butler on an estate worth hundreds of millions of dollars is a lot better than having the Yakuza chase after you for life, even if you are technically a slave for the next 4 decades. The thing is, though, living with someone as rich and spoiled as Nagi Sanzenin comes with its own set of built-in problems. For one, Nagi has no friends. Being her friend is your job now, or Hayate's job, I guess, and so when she's not spending time in one of her multiple video game rooms, she has a room for each console, by the way, but when she's not spending her time on the game or drawing manga, she's probably in your face doing some annoying shit, being a spoiled little tsundere. Like, come on, bro, who's trying to deal with that shit all day, day in and day out? As if just dealing with Nagi herself wasn't enough already, you also have to take care of her pet white tiger that she bonded with as a child on a safari trip to Africa. This white tiger, since moving into the Sanzenin estate and thus living the Sanzenin lifestyle, has been treated so well, has been fed such high quality protein that its brain actually developed way more than what a tiger should be capable of. And now, this tiger, whose name is Tama, by the way, is literally able to speak multiple human languages. This unbeknownst to Nagi, of course. Now, the tsundere activity, Hayate can handle that. The talking carnivorous beast, Hayate can actually handle that too. He actually has a lot of practice fighting big cats, thanks to the fact that he used to have to steal meat from the lion enclosure at the zoo for protein. That's a part of his canon backstory, by the way. I can't make this shit up. The one thing that makes being Nagi's butler a challenge for Hayate is the fact that the girl is quite literally so rich that she has frequent attempts at her life by those who are willing to risk it all to take the girl for ransom. In other words, by signing up to live as Nagi's butler for the next 40 years, Hayate has also unwittingly signed himself up to be her personal defender from threats that just seem to get crazier and crazier and crazier as the show goes on. Putting an exact number to Nagi's wealth for the sake of adding it to our running count is difficult, even more difficult than the other times so far. It's literally the equivalent of trying to power scale Saitama. You can look at feats and whatnot to see what has been done, but at the end of the day, we'll probably never know the full extent of what can be done. That's part of the reason why both of these series are considered gag manga in the first place. The best statement that we have for wealth scaling the Sanzenin estate is the time that we're told that Mikado Sanzenin was once willing to make a $20 trillion investment as a prank. Cleopatra's whole net worth as a prank. And so if you take our entire running count up to this point and just imagine that number being like haha prank money, yeah, you can kind of start to maybe get an idea of the type of bread that we're looking at. I'm saying it's probably 400 to 500 trillion. But if we found out one day that Nagi Sanzenin went band for band with God and won, I really wouldn't doubt it, man. I'm sorry.